You got me an apple? You know how I feel about apples. How could you do this? You know I hate apples. I would rather stab myself than ever eat an apple. In fact, if it came between me having to choose world peace or having to never eat an apple again, I would choose to never eat an apple again. In fact, if it came between choosing the love of my life and saving their life from a horrible, tragic death, or never having to see an apple ever again, I would choose to never see an apple again. I can't believe you did this to me. This is so painful. You know I hate apples. You know they make me want to throw up. I would rather sacrifice the life of a newborn child than ever eat an apple, and you still decide to give me an apple? Hi, I'm Hanahaki, but my friends call me Han, so you can call me that too. And today we're going to be talking about how Netflix might be showing you a completely different Squid Games than it's showing someone else, and how by doing that, it's failing you. Now, this criticism mostly focuses on Squid Game's subtitle translation and how by doing that poorly, Netflix has changed the experience for multiple different users. And I want to be completely clear that multiple streaming services have this problem too, but we'll be using Netflix and Squid Games to explain. Wait, who is we? But I'll be using Netflix and Squid Games in particular to explain how subtitles can really transform and change the plot of a story. Also because Squid Games is immensely popular right now, and there's currently discourse happening on its mistranslation done by Netflix, which is why this is an important topic right now. Also, totally irrelevant, I kind of got into the theme of Squid Games. I couldn't really dress up into their clothing because I don't own any of them, but I do own a grayish sweatshirt, so I wore it, and I don't know if you can see, but I made the shapes on my face that are behind the card and that the guards wear. I don't know if that's translatable at all through the screen, but yeah. And I also wore cuffs to show how we are all cuffed under capitalism, and not in the hot way, but in the, oh my god, we're prisoners kind of way, you know? Anyway, now as someone who grew up watching anime from a very, very, very young age, I'm no stranger to poorly translated subtitles. Now, in all fairness, it was actually a fan subtitle, so someone who's a fan and may not be fluent in Japanese or may not be fluent in English is the one who created that subtitle. And since they're not a professional, it's kind of understandable why that might not be perfect, or maybe they just don't have great semantic control. But when a fan chooses to create a subtitle, errors like this can happen. And also, by the way, this is like really big charity that somebody's doing, because it is hard work to do translation of any kind, so this is definitely charity. But when you watch like fan subtitles, there's no guarantee on the accuracy or the fluency, the translator or the subtitles that are coming, so it's a little more understandable why this happened. But with Netflix and Squid Games, yeah, that one's kind of surprising. Now, Netflix is currently one of the biggest streaming platforms, if it is not the biggest streaming platform, with 15k titles, and it's available in 190 countries, each with their own distinct languages and cultures. Now, most of the shows on it are offered in multiple different languages as dubs, and if you don't want to hear the dubs, then you can also choose subtitles in multiple other languages, which will make the original language a little clearer to you. And now this is great. It helps with accessibility, it helps in reachability, and it makes entertainment so much more consumable for people from all over the globe. Now, because Netflix is such a big organization and they have such a huge reach and therefore an expectation in how good their subtitles are going to be, especially when you aren't using subtitles as additional helping tools for a language you already understand and you're actually using them to understand a foreign language, and also if you're using them for like accessibility reasons. Now, when it comes to wildly popular Korean show Squid Games, which if you haven't heard of the plot yet, I'm kind of surprised since it's like so popular. Basically like a critique of capitalism, and it does this by having multiple people who are in different levels of crippling debt partake in kids games to win a certain amount of money at the end. But if you don't win the game, you are killed, and basically your body count adds more money into the amount of money that's going to be won at the end, so everyone has like motivation to preserve themselves and get to the end by themselves. And that's just like a spoiler-free explanation of what the show is like. Now, Squid Games offers criticism for a lot of different topics aside from just capitalism. It is also critiquing issues like exploitation of workers, exploitation of poor people, the debt problem, also imperialism, and explores these facets in Korea, but they're also definitely like relatable to other countries. And so because it is offered on Netflix and a lot of people who are watching it globally are not fluent in Korean, there comes a level of expectation on the kinds of subtitles that is offered to the user when they're watching Squid Games on Netflix. And this is just so that they'd be able to pick up on the nuances of the story, the cultural clues of the story, what's actually going on, and therefore the deeper plot points in the story. And because the non-Korean speaker doesn't understand the language, you kind of expect the subtitles to do the work of deciphering the metaphors, the nuances, and the deeper cultural points when you read them. And so here's where their problem lies. For a lot of Korean speakers on the internet, Netflix failed to deliver here. It did not truly incorporate the cultural nuances, deeper plot points, and the other aspects of the show that the writer so carefully constructed through the usage of the Korean language. And here's a TikTok that explains it way better than I just did.
Hi everyone, I just watched Squid Game and I'm fluent in Korean and I had the English subtitles on and I noticed that you're missing so much from the English subtitles. There's better examples, but these are just the ones that I found in like 10 minutes. But here's the first example. I want to start with Minya, by the way, which her name translates to beautiful girl, which I think is really interesting. Her dialogue constantly gets botched. Like every little thing that she says is fucked up. I think it's because she's like plays like a low class character and she's a gangster. So she cusses a lot and it gets very sterilized. And randomly, like even things that like aren't even that bad. Like she says like, what are you looking at? It's turned into go away, which might seem arbitrary, but like everything she says is not really aligning. And so you're missing a lot of this character and what she stands for. But here's the one part that I think is a huge miss. Here she is trying to convince people to play the game with her, right? Right here. The translation says, oh, I'm not a genius, but I can work it out. What she actually said was, I am very smart, I just never got a chance to study. That is a huge trope in Korean media. The poor person that's smart and clever and just isn't wealthy. That's a huge part of her character.
Add on to what she's saying, it shows that intelligence, which is traditionally thought of as the pathway to leave poverty and become more wealthy, isn't actually an asset you can use if you're poor. And therefore, if you're born poor and you don't have the opportunity to educate yourself and actually enhance on your intelligence, you can't live to your full capability. And hence, you get stuck in the same poverty cycle. And therefore, in a way, it is kind of explaining how deep the wealth inequality is. And I think it's a really important idea, since a lot of times when you think about wealth, we usually think about it in a way where we're like, okay, if we work hard and we're intelligent, we'll be able to get wealthy, we'll be able to break out of poverty. And this just kind of shows that no, you can be stuck in the same problems as other people and be in such a desperate state if you were never given the opportunity. And so if you're poor, but you're smart, you still might not be able to get out of the poverty cycle.
And almost everything she says is like being botched translation-wise, but you just missed, like the writers, all they want you to know about her is that. You know what I mean? It seems so small. But it's like the entire character's purpose of being in the fucking show.
Now to add on to what she's saying, there's a lot of cultural context that is lost in the subtitles that Netflix offered us. And there's even some claims that because of the nature of the translation, the plot of the show was tamer, more watered down, and an inaccurate analysis of what it was actually trying to critique, and therefore a poor representation of what the show actually is. And now before I continue, I'd just like to quickly apologize for any mispronunciation I'm doing here. I do not actually speak Korean, but I tried my best to get the names right. Also in this TikTok, as she did say, Minyo means pretty girl, and I think if that had been explained in the subtitle, the reasoning for this character's action would have made so much more sense. Like the fact that she seems to value her physicality and basically offers that a lot to the other players. When she offers it to this guy, I cannot remember his name for some reason right now, but this guy, and also later to Sang-woo and Gi-hoon, then she's kind of like, oh, like she offers herself, or she kind of tries to like flirt with them, and she's like constantly trying to push her looks and like her value because of the way she looks onto other people, and have it be like a reason as to why they should want her on their side. It would definitely explain her motivations more, and also serve as a illusion how sometimes poor women who happen to be pretty are expected to use their beauty to get ahead in life. But there's kind of like a ticking clock, because like, lots of times we attribute youth with beauty, and so like when you're not a pretty young woman, you can't really offer that anymore. Also, that's not what I think. That is just like from my experience of the world, the way society kind of values youth. And so if you're a pretty young woman, it like values you higher. So if you're poor, you could definitely use that to get ahead in life. But it's like once you use that youth, your beauty is discounted and you cannot go ahead anymore. I could be thinking a little too deep into that whole part over there about her beauty and like getting ahead in life and stuff. Since the writer here is very intentional in their usage of like names and just simple language, I can totally see it as being being an explanation for this character. But also we totally missed on that because we just had no idea what her name meant. If we found out that Minyeo meant pretty woman, then it would have been such an allusion to how poor pretty women are expected to use their physicality to progress under capitalism, which is super true.
Here's one more thing that got me real fucking fucked up, and then maybe I'll do more of these if I have time, okay?
한다면서 깐부도 몰라. 동네에서 구슬이랑 딱지랑 같이 쓰는 친구 말이야. 입거리가 금없이 깐부. 기억나네요. 저도 동네에 한 놈 있었어요. 저 제일 친하더라고. 그래, 그 깐부.
They missed a really small line there, but it's like literally the point of the whole episode. 깐부, 니꺼 내꺼 없이. What that translates into is there is no ownership between me and you. Not we share everything. That is a huge miss. That's like the entire point of this fucking episode. It's a very small sentence. But now it doesn't even make sense. Like what? It doesn't make sense. Like that is such a difference in ideology that the writer is trying to get across to you. Do you know what I mean? It's making me so angry. I have no idea why. I need to lay down.
This gangbo part makes me like so mad because if they had actually conveyed the intensity of the meaning of the word, then it would have made like Gi-hoon's betrayal, or I guess not betrayal, like the part where he lies to him about how many marbles he has and like whether or not it's even or odd, it would have made that been so much more like impactful and like emotional. And he would have been like, oh my god, I can't believe he's lying, when like that's what the gangbo means. And you're his gangbo, my dude. I do not know if I just used that correctly in a sentence. Now, actually, the original Tik Toker, her name's Youngmi Mayer, I think. She was actually told by a lot of other users that your subtitles on Netflix are set to English CC, that's English closed captioning. These errors are occurring in translation, but if they're set to English, just general English, you will have a more accurate reflection and translation of the Korean that's being spoken in Squid Games. Now I feel like this begs a few questions. One being, why does closed captioning change the meaning of the language? What about closed captioning makes it different than general translation, apart from like it being a little more accessible? And is there a reason for this difference? I don't personally think so, but is there one that I don't know about? Now, Youngmi Mayer did say that after she changed her subtitles from English CC to English, she did notice an improvement. But according to her, and I'm going to be reading this out to make sure it's accurate, the misses in the metaphors and what the writers were trying to actually say are still pretty present, which is tragic since a lot of art depends on conveying the metaphors and using specific language to convey deeper meanings in the art. So kind of sad about that. And there's actually a few other parts where the subtitles truly let us down. One of them being for characters like Kang Se-byuk or player 67, you know, all of our favorite girl. While watching, I was initially confused how some characters like reacted to her or like figured out that she was from North Korea, and this is because I, as someone who does not speak Korean or is not familiar with like the dialect differences between Korean in the South and in the North, I couldn't really pick up on those differences in her accent, but to a lot of Korean speakers it was very evident from the way she was talking. And I feel like if this was depicted and like displayed to us somehow, it would have definitely added another layer, because apparently according to a lot of the Korean speakers, Kang Se-byuk did try to like veil her accent and like keep it hidden, so the way she spoke to people is very specific, like to the other players, and this was to like minimize the difference of her dialect and try to hide the fact that she was North Korean. When she spoke to her little brother, her accent was thicker and she really spoke more comfortably, and I think this shows the difference in how freeing and how close she is with her brother and how much more guarded she is around the players and people who she's not close to. And you know, even though her story is so sad already, this would have made it even sadder. Like I would have shed a few more tears about her, you know? Maybe this is a good thing, because then I would have cried less. But now I'm like, do I want to cry more? Maybe I do. Maybe I enjoy being sad. Anyway, since I don't want to dwell more on that statement, another characterization that we totally missed on was that of the priest. You know, the one, I don't remember his name. I don't think we were ever introduced to his name, or maybe we are, and I don't really remember his character number either, but you know, this guy, the one who was introduced into their team for tug of war and who was pretty mean to the old man in the elevator going up to the tug of war, and even later, in later instances, he's like kind of a douche. Well, apparently through his speech, it was very evident that he is somehow involved in like a religious community community, which again, as someone who doesn't speak Korean, totally missed that. Now, according to Edward Long, who was actually involved in the dubbing of Squid Games, when he was speaking about the importance of having people of an ethnicity be involved in the translation work of content from that ethnicity, he said, and I'm quoting once again, "The way Korean religious people, especially pastors, talk is a very specific way of talking. That's something I know all too well from being stuck in those Korean church services as a kid." Now, I'm sure if this difference was somehow displayed in the subtitles, it would have, added a layer to the story, may have hinted at who he was before it was even finally revealed, and would have made his discussion with character 240 so much more impactful, especially due to character 240's backstory. Like her entire criticism towards him, like her very open critique of like his actions and how he immediately prays to God after like doing some things that I, at least from my interpretation and understanding of Christianity, are sins, would have made a lot more sense. Also would have explained why her character, who did not express very much, she was very open about her criticism towards the priest. After all, how is a man of God okay with doing things that involve the death of others that are very, not godly? Please don't answer that. This is not supposed to be a discussion on religion. And something else that the subtitles made us miss that personally she'd kind of heard very intensely was the change in the relationship between Sang-woo and Ali. Now, Ali goes from calling Sang-woo Sajangnim, Sajangnim, which I think means boss, to Hyung. I think this can be explained better from a TikToker who actually speaks Korean.
Remember Ali from Squid Game? For me, his situation was the saddest in the show. And that's because of a lot of the things that I learned while I was living in Korea, both the Korean language and about the culture. And I wanted to share these things because I know that the show's hot right now, but I think that it would help people appreciate it and his character a bit more. This is your warning for a spoiler alert if you haven't watched the show yet. So first of all, Ali is a migrant worker. Migrant workers are basically immigrants from other countries outside of Korea that have come to Korea to do certain jobs. Usually they come on a visa that ties them to a certain employer, but sometimes they come undocumented. The issue of migrant workers and their exploitation is a serious issue in Korea. Here's a couple headlines that really sum up the role of migrant workers in Korean society. Some call it modern-day slavery, and migrant workers are often at risk of sexual assault or poor working conditions. When Ali and Sang-woo get out of the Squid Game and he says he's going to go home, Ali says he's going to walk all the way home. He says he's going to walk to Ansan. Let's take a look at how long it'll take to walk from Yeouido, which is where they are, to Ansan. 7 hours and 50 minutes. Now, the English subtitles will say that Ali addresses Sang-woo as Sir.
사장님, 전화 있어요?
What he's really saying is 사장님, which is boss. Usually that refers to the owner of a company, restaurant, store, etc. Someone who's higher in position than you. And being called 사장님, if you're not someone's direct boss or you're not like the owner of wherever they're visiting, it's really awkward. So that's why Sang-woo's like, don't call me your boss. Like I'm not the boss, so don't call me that.
감사합니다, 사장님. 사장님 아니니까 사장님 소리를 그만하고.
He's trying to be as respectful as possible, but he doesn't have a very broad vocabulary.
Like she said, he goes from calling Sang-woo Sajangnim to Hyung. Now, as someone who's watched a lot of Korean content, I did notice that a lot of times when characters got closer together or characters who were already close, like the younger one would refer to the older one who he's close to as Hyung, or I think even if they're like brothers, they call him Hyung. I'm not really sure, but that's what I assumed from the context of what I was watching. Ali went from calling him Sajangnim boss to literal brother, or someone who's really close to him, and therefore when Sang-woo eventually betrays him, it makes that so much more painful. But also it shows the depth of Sang-woo's betrayal and how desperate he is and how desperate capitalism might make a person. So I don't feel much pity towards Sang-woo. Like that man kind of dug that hole for himself. And I know he's hot, we can all simp over him, but we can be critical to someone while simping over their actor. It's totally possible. Separate the art from the artist, and this time it's for good cause. Now another part that I don't know if we can really reference this as like a subtitle error more than like a naming error is that according to Youngmi Mayer, and she was the person in the first TikTok I showed at the start of this video, the episode is called Red Light Green Light instead of like the Mungunghwa flower blossomed, and apparently the national flower of South Korea is the Mungunghwa. I'm sorry for that mispronunciation, since the episode is called Red Light Green Light instead of like the name of South Korea's national flower. It raises the metaphorical meaning of the episode and therefore like the foreshadowing that's happening in the first episode's title itself. That's so sad. I wish we knew that. I wish there was like maybe like a note letting us know about that, because that would have been cool. Alright, so we know all the problems, but do we know why these are happening? And also, why are these translators and or subtitlers who clearly know the meaning of this dialogue and these words. Why are they mistranslating it or translating it in this way? Well, there's actually a genuine reason for all of this, and I like to call it the subtitle dilemma. So apparently a lot of conversational dialogue in TV is like cut from the subtitles, and it's usually due to time constraint. See, it takes a certain amount of time for our brains to process words, and there's also like a general average reading time most people take to read dialogues. And so there just isn't enough time sometimes to translate all the dialogue that's happening on screen. We process what we hear way faster than we process what we read. And so because subtitles are a medium that we read, sometimes you cannot translate all of the audio dialogue into it. So let me set the scene for that. There's multiple characters and they're all arguing and they're all speaking very fast. A subtitler cannot possibly translate every single bit of dialogue that's on screen due to the amount of time it takes for the person reading the subtitles. And if they did that, it would just become very confusing and we'd have to like pause every 2 seconds to read what's going on. So that part is very understandable. According to a 1978 survey of the British Film Institute's like subtitling. Now, okay, I know this is like 1978, that's like a long time ago, but I didn't really find any more like recent studies. So if anyone knows any, please send them my way. On average, about a third of a film's dialogue is lost in the subtitling process. So we're losing so much of content just because of the amount of time it takes for our eyes to read. Once again, I am mad about human limitations. And now, like, we can't really blame this part of the subtitling process on companies like Netflix because they have to accommodate the needs of like everyone and therefore need to use average reading time it takes and keep that into account so the interaction is seamless and accessible for most people. So there I kind of get why Netflix does these things. According to translator Denise Kripper, and again, once again I'm reading this, audiovisual translator subtitling in particular is limited to space constraints on the screen. In general, subtitles can't be longer than 2 lines. That's even fewer characters than a tweet. The most perfect of translation still needs to be paraphrased or adapted if it doesn't fit within those spatial limitations. So besides the reading time, there's also the problem of the amount of space that's available to put subtitles in. Now, you can't have the subtitle covering the screen or covering the characters' faces, so you're limited to a very small portion of the screen, and so you need to make sure that their subtitles fits in that space on the screen, therefore limiting the amount that can actually be translated. Gosh, that's kind of annoying. That's actually quite, that's pretty sad. Why are we so limited as humans? Why can't we just see through words? But then we couldn't read. Now, the audiovisual industry, which is what subtitles and like translation and all fall into, is a very fast-paced industry because according to Denise Kripper, the industry moves fast, time is money in the television industry, so turnaround for translation can be fast. And she also says that translators work around the clock so that people can watch their favorite shows. So sometimes translators have to work really fast and just don't have the time to closely translate anything. That part's kind of sad, that this industry is like a very fast-paced one so that the people working in it don't have time to keep up with it. That part's really sad. And just a random reference, but I do remember in this K-drama actually called Run On, where one of the main characters is a translator, her experience is like she really, grinds throughout the day to be able to produce her translation content, and it seems like a very, very difficult job, or like a very time-consuming and strenuous job. Again, that is the K-drama, so it's not completely accurate of the experience, but even when it was a very romanticized version of the job, it seemed like a difficult one. And so don't hate on the subtitlers, y'all. Also, every channel or platform has their own guidelines for formatting offensive language and cultural-specific references that probably adds on to the amount of work that a translator and a subtitler is doing, since they have to be very specific to follow the guidelines of each streaming service that they're translating for. I also don't know how true this part is, but I did read in some forums that allegedly, translators and subtitlers are not paid enough for the amount of work that they do, so there's not even like a high motivation to produce like insanely high quality work. But again, this is alleged, so I don't know how true this is, but I can imagine it. I feel like a lot of times in industries like this, it is more work than how much you're getting paid. That's so sad. I'm just getting sad. I'm talking about a sad show and sad conditions. Also, at times, the characters in TV shows and movies might say short, quick dialogues or exclamations where in that language, the meaning of it is like concisely fitted in that word, but in English or another language, when you translate it, the meaning might be more longer and might take more time to explain. So translators and subtitlers have to look for the closest thing to that word in the language you're translating it in, which might cause you to lose out on like the actual word. So they have to find like the next best word that quickly translates this meaning so that it like fits in with the time that the character is saying this dialogue, while also making sure that it's like comprehensible to the viewer. So they have to fit a lot of details into like the words that they translate. Another reason, oh wow, there's more of these, is that translators often have to deal with translating crude remarks, culture-specific language, and other words that might not have direct translations into English or other languages, or they might be received differently depending on a different region. Like for example, a word might mean something, but its literal translation might be something like more object-based. Like for example, maybe a word means like dumb, but the word or the metaphor itself is something like head stuck in the mud, or like covered ears, or something like that like depicts like a visual description, and so it might not be as easily translatable. So then it's up to a translator to kind of like find a way or find a word that closely resembles that, or just a word that provides simpler but closer meaning. According to Walo Skopaskasa, the language manager for Italian and Greek at Netflix, and again, gonna be quoting him, Netflix aims to be respective to creative intent and cultural sensitivity. So having that as like the goal, I do imagine it being difficult for translators to completely abide by that in a way that does 100% justice to the language. Also, Netflix does have localization teams that make sure the subtitles is like translatable to different localities, and because of the existence of that team, I do imagine there's an additional issue of making sure things are more understandable to people from specific regions too. There might be some metaphors, imagery that won't make sense to a person in one country. Like for example, if there's someone who lives in a place that has more snow, they might have more words, descriptions, or actions that are dedicated for snow. So someone who lives in a super tropical area might not actually even be familiar with those actions or the meaning of those things relating to snow. So I do imagine that for the localization team, and therefore for the translator, they might have that as a challenge. Another thing I learned is that while Netflix does have human translators, some streaming services don't even use humans. Like they use literal like translation apps or translation bots, which probably do like an awful job of translating and completely miss the very human context and underlying meaning to the words they use. And so, knowing all of that, what now? So we know the reasons why this is still happening and how it's hurting our viewing experience, and therefore we know because of this, our viewing experience of Squid Games isn't completely authentic and isn't as intense or as true as a viewing experience of someone who is fluent in Korean and understands the South Korean cultural context in it too. So what can we do, and what are the solutions? Now, one solution I can think of has to do with fan subtitles, and I know initially I did say that, there's a problem with accuracies with them, but something I noticed when I would watch the fan subtitles of specific animes that were not available in my area was that a lot of times when they were talking about specific events or metaphors or things that are very specific not only to Japan but also to this particular area that the anime is set in or the age of the characters, while they'd have the subtitles down here for translation, up at the top of the screen there'd be a little description of what the context, the cultural aspect, or the difficult to translate word meant. So say it was something like a festival that was specific to a certain region in Japan, and therefore the event that the anime was showing was very specific to that. And so if you weren't familiar with that event, you would not really understand why the character's taking certain actions. They would have the actual festival written on top of the screen over here with a description of what it is and what generally happens, and also when it happens too. And it would stay about as long as the subtitles would stay. And if you are curious about it, you can pause your screen, read what's written on top, understand the context a little more, and then continue with the show. But again, this would require you actually pausing, and you might have to pause more often, which I'm sure decreases the seamlessness of the user experience. Another thing I did mention earlier because of the translator Edward Hong is that it is very important to have the translators and the people working on the translation and subtitle process be people from the country or the ethnicity or the culture that the show or the content is set in. And this is to make sure that the translation is as accurate as possible. Now, I think Netflix does a really good job at this, but according to Kathy Rockney, the director of globalization at Netflix, again, I'll be quoting her, if the content is not Netflix content, there's a lot of licensing agreement that needs to happen. The licensing agreement is both for the language, what languages we can actually broadcast on the show, and also what countries can have them. Subtitles are considered kind of like an IP, so if the title was owned by Disney, for example, or by some other big or small studio, we don't necessarily have the rights to change those subtitles. So I imagine if something is not a Netflix original and Netflix just got the rights to it, they can't really guarantee quality of the subtitles, especially since there are restrictions regarding that. And so I can obviously they're Netflix not being to blame for how accurate they are, but that is why I think it is very important for there to be a norm across the audio visual industry for people familiar and of the ethnicity that a show is from be at the forefront of the translation process. Also, if the alleged rumor of like streaming services not paying the translator enough is real, then I really hope this industry starts normalizing paying translators wages that are more accurate to the level and amount of work that they're doing, not only to motivate them, but also because I feel like if you're not paying them enough for their labor, isn't that a form of exploitation? And that just doesn't seem to be like the vibe. Additionally, I do think it's important to note that Netflix has tried to implement changes to the way they do the translation work. They did try to improve their training and linguistical issues. So in 2017, it released Hermes, the first online subtitling and translating and indexing system released by a major content creator. With this, it hoped to attract translation talent from all across the globe and produce higher quality translations. But in 2018, Hermes actually shut down since, and this is according to Netflix's website, we have reached our capacity for each one of the languages test due to rapid popularity and response from applicants all over the world. Therefore, we are closing the platform to future testing at this time. They actually said they learned a lot from the Hermes project. Netflix claims that it was useful in other ways than it was intended for, and that I'm going to read this to make sure I got the facts right. The project generated lots of new ideas that Netflix has taken forward, such as scheduling improvements, enhanced style guides, and continued development of cloud-based content localization platforms. This is according to what Alison Smith said. So it helped more with like the logistical aspect of translation. Also, another thing I noticed this, and this is like maybe a small thing, I don't know how like easy it is to do because this might actually add some more work, but one time I watched this anime movie, I don't remember which one it is, but it was like a fan subbed one on like a random vague website where most of my area were demanding my attention. But anyway, so I was watching the anime movie there, and the fans of the subbing said they were trying like a new way of presenting subtitles, and what they did is the text would be placed in a way where you can see the characters and your eyes like naturally follow the dialogue too. So say I'm the character speaking, that'll be like right here, or it'd be like right here by my lips, like as they're moving. As I'm speaking, they would come and then they'd fade and they'd keep moving like that. It was really cool. I don't know how easy it is to implement, but it genuinely helped my viewing experience because my eyes didn't have to like constantly go down or stray away from the screen, and I'd have to say it kind of reduced the cognitive load because I didn't have to like move my eyes around a lot. Aside from all of these, I do truly believe that the translation industry will be evolving a lot as the need for both accurate and contextually accurate translation develops, especially with the amount of criticism Netflix is getting with their translation handling of Squid Games. Hopefully we'll see a positive change, and since now international shows are getting more and more popular and the demand for like accurate translation is growing, a lot of streaming services will hopefully answer to this with better subtitles. So again, bringing it back to Squid Games, Netflix's subtitling job making us lose out on the true meaning of Squid Games, and therefore are we watching a completely different show than Korean speaking viewers? Now, as someone who does not speak Korean, I cannot answer this question with complete certainty, but in my opinion, I don't think that the true meaning of the show is completely lost. I do think it was able to get its general message across, but we miss out on a lot of nuances and a lot of the deeper exploration that was happening in the show for sure. And also the writer Hwang Dong-hyuk, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, put so much effort onto the show he worked on for like almost more than a decade. I think like 12 years. He put so much effort into every like part of the language, and like action is so well thought of that it is so truly sad that since we do not speak Korean, we'll never be able to truly pick up on that and absorb the art as authentically as it is. And that is why it is so important for streaming services, especially gigantic streaming services like Netflix that are leading the industry, to focus on providing the best subtitles that they possibly can. Art exists in the culture and the context it was created in, and that gives it so much more meaning when we are consuming it, just like we saw in Squid Games. If we don't focus on making better subtitles, a lot of great shows are going to be lost in the translation. And maybe as someone who doesn't speak Korean, maybe some really important parts of Squid Games were lost in translation. I guess I'll never know unless I learn Korean. This would be a great ad to learn Korean. Views of foreign language titles have gone up by almost 50% in 2020 on Netflix, which shows that there's a significant and immediate demand to focus on subtitles. Right now, foreign shows like Squid Games are gaining popularity, and I think according to some news articles I've read, Squid Games is about to become the biggest show on Netflix yet. And so it's the duty of these streaming services that are providing access to shows like Squid Games to make sure that they're accurately consumed and that they do justice to the art. Okay, that is all. That was so much. That was so much. I've been speaking for so long. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have more thoughts, opinions, and also would just like to elaborate a little more on what I said or even correct me, feel free to do so in the comments. I'd love to read it. And I'm gonna ask for validation now because I am a small channel, and also validation is kind of nice sometimes. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, and subscribe so I know that I can keep making content like this. Yeah, also, 1 like equals 1 slap by Gong Yu. You're telling me you do not want to be slapped by this beautiful man? He's the only man I would willingly let slap me. Like, you know that game they play? I would lose on purpose just so that man can like, phew, you know? Anyway, I will see you next week with a brand new video. I'm thinking of going into like the character of Ali a little more, since I do think some people saw him as like too nice and didn't understand like the deeper meaning of his character. I don't know. Are y'all interested? Who's y'all? No one watches me. Y'all is me editing this video because I need my future opinion. Anyway, have a lovely day. I'm gonna go watch Hometown Cha 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 after Squid Games. I need healing drama. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.